Hi and welcome to the longest tutorial I've made this far. Today I will be showing you what I've done with the reference on the left. As you can see, it was generated by AI, which I found on Pinterest, and I decided to do something very similar with colors and give you a tutorial on how to paint trees by like a river bank or lake with flowers in the front. So here we go. This is a Procreate only brush tutorial, so I'm starting with the round brush, which I haven't used before, so this is also a little bit of experimentation for me. And I'm using the blue from the image and then adding some lighter colors in the more turquoise spectrum and the dark navy. I am keeping it fairly rough because I know I'm going to adjust it as we go through the painting together, and I will be adding some clouds eventually, but the blue is there first of all to balance out the green that I'll be putting in the background for the trees. This round brush is making quite the interesting texture that looks really soft and fluffy, and I really like that, so I wanted to keep it in for a bit. But usually what happens is I put in my colors for the background, the sky, and then I end up blurring them with a Gaussian blur. But if you're unfamiliar with Procreate's functions and that, don't worry about this blur option for now, because later on when I'm using it I will explain what I'm doing properly. Using the same brush, I move on to painting the water body in the front by just choosing a darker bluish greenish color. I use the grid to help pull a straight line across, and then I'm painting the bottom half of this painting in this color, so that will be the water later on, and then I'll add a layer for the grass that is in front on top of that. I don't need to worry about that for the minute. So it will be easier for you as well if you block out a shape like the water body now, then later on you can add a clipping mask which allows you to paint only in that shape without painting over it, over the lines. So that would be much easier instead of worrying about erasing anything. I have activated in my Procreate app, and I think it is the standard thing to have, that when you pull a line and you hold the last bit of it down, that it kind of becomes a straight line by itself. I think it is like a drawing guide or help. It really helps when I'm trying to erase something and to make a straight line. So that is a tip if you aren't too familiar with these things. I usually have my favorite painting brushes on here, but I'm choosing different ones, and I'm just kind of looking for various types of brushes that could help. Turpentine looks like a brush or a sponge-like brush, which I find really helpful to put down some texture for the trees. And to be honest, I think any sponge type brush would do it, but turpentine for me has been working really well as an alternative that is an original brush. Choosing a mint green as my mid color, I'm going to start layering with the turpentine brush. I'm just going to use that in various sizes to start putting on more color and to create a more density of the brush strokes slash splatters. If I were to try and sum up how I paint, it is by creating patterns with brushes or by creating patterns with dots or whatever, brush strokes, and then creating forms out of those patterns by adding various other brush strokes. And maybe that is just a general definition of art or something, but I feel like the more layers of color you add and the more shape you give it therefore. So I always encourage that layers of colors, and trying to purposefully as well create those kind of things. So to add a little bit more definition to the painting right now, I'm going to start putting some shadows and then doing the sky in the background, adding some other colors there as well. To start adding shadows, I begin by building up the whole forest on the other side of the river from the bottom up, so making sure that there is darker where it is closer to the water because less light gets there. And I'm using a bluish shade because that is the color of the sky, and the sunlight will be yellow, so I'm kind of creating a bit more dimension by choosing blue shadows and lighter yellow highlights. This is now where I'm using a darker blue to give a bit more depth into the sky behind the forest. For this, I'm also still using the turpentine brush. Because I'm painting on a layer behind the green layer of bush, you might not see everything I put down, but I'm trying to also just figure out where there are any holes or gaps between in the green. In my regular paintings I use the studio pen quite a lot, but I have modified the version of studio pen that I'm using, so I decided to go and find the original one, which took me a bit longer than expected. But I'm going to use that one for the bottom bushes of the forest on the other side, and trying to get them in one straight line or on the same line, getting the bushes that surround the water down. When I choose colors, I usually make sure that I just adjust the type of color, so I go between green, yellow and green bluish tones, and I try to vary them while I choose between shadows, highlights and midtones to give the whole thing a bit more realism. If you stick to one color, like just saying the green part of the color wheel, and you stick to that one thing with all the different shades of that color, then you will achieve a much more flat look than a dimensional one. And if that's what you're going for, fair enough. But if you want to mix it up a bit, then I believe it comes a bit more to life. Choosing the turpentine brush again, I'm going to be using some darker shades, colors, and add a bit more dimensionality to the whole thing again. It will be a constant build-up of layers of color and shades of color on top of each other to create the look that I want to go for. And I'm just kind of easing myself forward because I chose a relatively light mid-tone, which it looks like it is very similar to the picture on the left. I want to make sure that I'm not using too dark colors, I'm choosing dark enough colors, if that makes sense. So in a second now I'm going to be using the lasso tool, and I'm going to try and adjust a few things, namely the shadow in the back, where I'm going to erase a little bit now as well. And then also I adjusted the bottom right bushes in height early on, which is a very helpful thing. Do let me know in the comments if you want to have a video that is more in depth about using the different tools in Procreate, and I can make a very simple guide to that. Choosing a dark blue color, I'm going to start putting in the trees. For this I'm using the hard airbrush, and I'm just going to roughly put in a couple of silhouettes of trees and their branches, which you can go on later to erase few bits and pieces, or you could do it perfectly the first time. I usually try and just sketch out a few things before I invest too much energy in them, just to see how they look, and then I can always change things as I go. I think for me that feels like that is probably just my creative process, and I'm sure there are different ones out there. But yeah, I just kind of try and get them out there first and then see what's missing or what's looking weird. Okay, so I've nearly painted my trees in and I'm quite happy with what I've got, but I realized that the color that I've chosen is a little bit too light in the bottom and you can't see it against the shadow. So first I tried to make it a little bit darker by hand, but the lasso tool is super helpful, where you can just circle something and then you can choose the magic wand on the left top and then choose brightness, and if you lower that it should get darker. But what I realized is I made a stupid mistake that happens way too often that I want to admit. Essentially, I put the trees on the same layer as the dark shadow I put in the back, and by checking my layers I see where you can see the bushes now in the background that are dark, they're on the same layer. So what I usually do to fix that is I create two layers of the tree and the bush thing, or wherever the mistake is, and then I leave the trees as they are because they're not going to harm anyone, but I hide the lower layer of the two, and then I start erasing the bushes in the top one. It doesn't matter if you're not erasing perfectly, especially when it comes to the trees. If you erase parts of the trees, if they're not too big, it doesn't matter because you still have the layer below where the tree silhouettes are still the way you had them before. So don't worry too much about getting that 100% right because the stress is not worth it. And then once you've rid your layer of the imperfection, you can blend in the other layer again. And and the trees where you have erased a little bit too much are back to normal, but also you have got your bushes back in, and you can later on color the trees with a clipping mask layer on top of that without actually coloring your bushes. Next, I want to refine the trees I've painted in. So essentially I am going to use an eraser, the studio pen as the eraser tool, and then I'm going in and just taking off the thickness of the top branches, which will be shining through the foliage of the trees later on. As this is a real-time tutorial and I've just cut it together so there aren't any great gaps where I'm just sitting around staring at it, wondering where I'm going to go next with it. I do want to know if anybody's actually watching this, if you do prefer the long ones without any sped up, because I have uploaded tutorials in the past which have been 20, 30, 40 minutes long, and even then I thought nobody's gonna watch those. Turns out those are the most popular ones I've done. I had sped up parts in all of them because I did want to try and get it down as much as possible in time consumption. But I wonder with this 2-hour long video if you do change your mind, if you prefer this, or if this was good for you to paint along, or what do you think about this. Just let me know in the comments or DM me on Instagram, because this is something that is really a question that I ask myself mostly because it does take me 2-3 whole days to edit and film this entire video. So yeah, just checking. After refining the tree ends or tree trunk ends, I'm going to be going in with a studio pen, which is a lot finer than the round brush I've used before, or the hard airbrush, and I'm going to paint in some more, or sketch in some more branches. Now you can go as wild as you want with these, because depending on the type of painting you're doing, you don't even have to stick to realism or attempting at realism. I'm going to try and give them a downward, like hanging motion, some of them, or ones that extend into the distance a little bit to have the leaves fall off them later. I think by now probably you've noticed that I'm not quite sticking to the reference picture, and as usual I'm gonna say that reference pictures are just your guidance. You don't have to do any of it, you can do all of it, but reference pictures are just that, a reference to help you shape things in a specific way. And for me, the most important part of the reference image was the sunlight and the way the colors just had this really nice soft feeling to it, and I wanted to kind of bring that into my own painting. So for the first good hour of painting, I think I really struggled with persevering a little bit. My paintings usually in the beginning don't look anywhere like I'm thinking they should be looking, so it does take quite a bit of pushing on for me to kind of get over that part and finally get to the part where I feel like it's coming together. If you are also someone who struggles with that, keep pushing on. I can only encourage you to do that, because I've noticed every painting that I've pushed further than I thought I knew how to or I could turned out really well in the end, and much better than I would have thought, or much differently. But you know, it doesn't really matter, does it? At the end of the day, it is practice for you, and you know, you just try and make the best of what you have in front of you, really. Because for some reason Procreate mistakes my hand as a pen, or like me painting with my hand at the same time as I do with the pen, I often erase the last thing I did, and I usually don't want to do that. I've turned it off, but Procreate seems to still do that. So that's why I create a lot of layers on top, always new layers, to secure what I've done beneath. I do have to clean up my layers quite a bit, and I don't know if you have your own process, but I do have to merge them quite often to make sure that I'm sticking to the layer amount that I can have, and I'm not struggling for space, and also that I'm not confusing myself with thousands of layers. Okay, so going with a darker shade again, I'm going to continue building up the leaves at the top of the trees and putting in some more depth. When I don't know where to continue with my painting, I usually start detailing, and that kind of allows me to create the shapes intentionally that I want to lay out and find them, and then I can go from there with the rougher brushes again. But it does help to zoom in and have a look, right, where are my bunches of leaves going to be, where is there going to be shade or light, and where is it going to be rounder. Where there is more light, I add more detail, because the light usually illuminates the items that kind of stick out, or the elements. When you look into a row of trees, if there is a lot of shadow, those leaves will blur together a little bit, so the ones in the light will stick out, and I kind of go with that principle. Okay, so this is the only part where I've actually sped up anything. I'm just going to try and get all the colors from the trees I can just make out by my eyes, which stand out the most, to make sure that I am in the color range that I am looking for. So I'm just going to have that up there as guidance. I usually don't really stick to it, but I choose the lighter colors or whatever from it, which gives me a good starting point, and then I go from there really. It can be a bit daunting to put in the lighter colors when you've got a whole load of dark on your painting picture, but you can later make sure that those blend in more together, not by blending them in literally, but actually having those lighter bits, and then between the light and the darker bits adding mid-tone colors, where you can literally just open the color wheel from the selected color you have in your lighter, for example, in the lighter colors, and then just drag down the drop a little bit, and you'll have a slightly darker color that is not quite the darkest color that you have next to it, but it will bridge over the gap between the light and the dark. I hope that makes sense, but that's usually how I choose my colors. Because the light color I added before isn't the lightest one, I want to make sure I'm including the whole range of light, and then only adding white or the lightest colors at the very end as highlights. But I want to make sure that I can include even the lightest colors that I've got here now in the painting without making it look artificial or out of place. So I've established the mid-range of colors, which was the one I started with. Then I used darker colors to give it a bit of more shadow and shape to where I wanted to have highlights, making out where the different shapes are, and then adding the lighter layers of light. I can then go on after and start blending them as I described earlier by adding colors that are next to the lightest and the darkest. I'm now going in with the studio pen again and starting to put down like actual leaves, or trying to make out or mimic the pattern of leaves with the little dot shapes that I'm using. I'm just going to start again at some point random in the picture just to get a bit of a sense of an idea where I'm going with this, because I remember this was a part where I was like, okay, what do I do now? So yeah, adding some detail will give it a bit more of a sense of direction maybe. To choose the color that I'm using now, I went probably onto that color beneath it and then just put the teardrop in the circle of color in the color wheel. I pushed that up slightly to get a bit more vibrant and lighter green, and I'm doing the same to get the shadows. It is always a bit of a trial and error, but I am hoping that the explanations that I'm giving you while I'm doing this is kind of helpful to finding colors. I get the comments a lot on Instagram that people wouldn't have the patience to put down the single teardrops and whatever, and I can only say to that two things. One is selectively choosing where you want to add detail if you don't want to put that onto the whole painting and spend like 10 hours on it, which is absolutely fine. Choosing where you put in the details, which would be, for example, the lighter parts where the sun really picks out the elements. And secondly, I would suggest that you choose a brush that mimics the shape of the detail that you want the best. For example, there are lots of stamp-like brushes out there with leaves instead of just random splatters and dots, so that could be helpful. But I try to avoid using any pre-made brushes that have the shape of something specific, because I want to make sure that my skills are transferable from iPad to paper to canvas with oils and acrylics, because I enjoy all kinds of mediums. And I think you kind of get a sense of where things belong when you practice this long enough. You get a feeling for where it looks best or where it suits to get this detail in and that detail. And I don't want to lose that by using pre-made stamp brushes, for example. But that is obviously also an option that you can choose, is getting brushes from, for example, Danielle L. Cruz. I know she does a lot and she does them for free, I believe. So you can always check those out. But I definitely suggest trying to get it done on your own, unless you want to have a quick 10-minute painting, of course. But I also see the value in choosing to paint very long and work on something very hard. Obviously, after that, you might feel even more accomplished. So, but that is absolutely your personal decision, and there is no judgment from me over here, so just do what feels good to you. This is an example of me trying to blend the colors by making sure they overlap a little bit each here and there, the dark and the light, and then finding some appropriate midtones that kind of go the range from the light to the dark parts. I'm going to be detailing a lot in this video, which I will not be speaking over, but hopefully is self-explanatory. But for the detailing, I exclusively use the studio pen in this background, and then for the grass data I'll be using different ones as well, but the studio pen for the trees, for the detailing, is all I need for this. Okay, so I've added a whole lot of details and kind of given this a lot better of shape and form. So next I'm going to be choosing a hard airbrush, and I want to give the whole thing a bit more color vibrancy or saturation without using any special effects or filters. I'm simply using the airbrush and I'm pressing very gently so that the opacity is really low. You can also change the opacity on the bar on the very left, the bottom bar. You can just pull that down a bit and you'll have lower opacity. But essentially I'm just going over it, adding a bit more of this like kind of atmospheric fog to it where the light comes onto it, and also some darker, more vibrant colors. It does change the sharpness of it, but for me that doesn't matter as much because I know I'm going to be adding a whole lot of layers on top, which means it won't matter as much. Actually, it might even help to bring the top layers into more focus because there isn't an entire sharp focus overload of details, but more like just the top layers, if you know what I mean. To make sure that the blurriness didn't take away from the picture, I'm just going to go over the edges where the blurriness makes the other lines fade the most, and I'm going to add even more detail to make sure that it doesn't look like it's blurry but more soft. And also for this I'm using the studio pen as per usual. When trying to understand where to put the shadow or the light details, I can only say that I think while you use reference photos when you're not sure what you're doing, and also it just comes with practice, I think. I feel like that has become easier and easier for me as time went by. I just understood it better. And to be honest, when I first started on Procreate, it took me a year of searching online, how does light work and shadow and whatnot, and practicing to finally have any idea of what I'm doing. And even now I barely feel like I am kind of like aware of the technical stuff. So you know, if you are frustrated because you feel like you don't know where to put things or you just don't know how it works, you know, I definitely understand, and I feel like everybody kind of goes through that, so don't be too hard on yourself. Just use reference photos for that. Okay, so by now I'm feeling fairly okay with what I'm doing in the background, and I decided to change the very background a little bit more. So in the reference photo, as you've seen before, there is a darker right corner and it goes into the lighter shades in the left, in the more turquoise ones, although I did use more baby blue to be fair than turquoise. But I'm using the Gradation blur on this one, which you've seen me just use. You can tap into it with the one tool on the top left, and then by sliding across the screen you can adjust the percentage of blur, and you can just kind of experiment a little bit with that. Obviously this is quite a stark blot in the background that I've made, so I'm using the tools to kind of adjust where I want to have it, but you could just erase it and do it differently, I guess. You don't have to use these kinds of tools. I'm just kind of trying to make sure that it looks a little bit more natural, and then I will be adding some clouds with various brushes that I will name whenever they come up, and then yeah, we'll move on towards the front of the picture. Okay, so correction, I'm going to do the clouds later by the look of it. Since I'm doing the voice recording post-production filming, I guess, I always kind of try and anticipate what's happening next, and I'm usually wrong, as you can see. But yeah, we will be trying to merge together the bottom and the top half of the picture and start by shading and giving the lake some life. So to create a kind of mirror reflection on the water, I usually use the same technique over and over again. I blot down the colors that I'm using, the shadow for example, first of all, and then using a textured brush in large or in small depending, I put down the opacity of the brush itself, the color, and then I start smudging down with the smudge tool at the top right, smudging down the lines I've created. If you're unsure of what you're doing, make sure you duplicate the layers and hide the one below, just so that you can always go back without ruining your picture. So I try to smudge it out a lot, and it doesn't matter if the darkness kind of fades away, because when you duplicate that layer again, it will essentially, like now, double in value. So you're right with that. And then I go in horizontal lines across the painting, and that kind of gives it that water and mirror kind of look, where the stuff kind of is broken up, where the light reflections are broken up by the waves or the movement in the water. I had those top ones duplicated, the top layers that I'm starting to smudge out again, because I wanted to keep that real intense color for the very top, where the two things come together, water and grassland. And yeah, and from here I'm going to start painting in colors using the same technique over and over again to help me create a mirrored look with the colors. But I'm not adding any crazy colors as for now, because any crazy light colors, I mean as in that neon or the really fluorescent green that you can see in the middle there, I will add those on the top of the water after I'm done with all the other details, because that is like the final step where it kind of you can selectively choose where you put your light. From here on, I'm going to try to get all that bush and grass beside the lake in full detail, and trying to like render it out a little bit better so that the shapes come to life, and adding depth and light and yeah, the usual stuff, using the studio pen of course, and the the turpentine brush, not tourmaline, never mind. When I work on a painting, it is easy to let the hours build up where I just do detailing for a long time. In this case, I really try to get there faster, but that is probably why I left out a lot of mid colors to make it look a lot softer. So I think I got this painting in just under 2.5 or 3 hours, and that is pretty fast generally speaking, because I take a lot longer when I do my own stuff. Especially the latest, largest project that you might have seen on Instagram took me 37 hours that I'm going to upload a time-lapse of probably in the near future. But yeah, it can take a long time, so I was trying to get this in quicker, and yeah, I'd just be interested to know as well how long it takes you to do a painting, and what time you say that you're done, because I feel like a lot of time can go by where I feel like I just don't want to do anything about it, and then suddenly one day I'll think, oh yeah, there's the spot there, I could have done something else, and then I go in and I start working on it again. So it never really stops, to be honest, unless I feel completely satisfied with it, which I don't know if I've ever left a painting the way it was. But yeah, that is just the art process, I guess. So as you can see, I decided to have a green layer instead of a blue one for the lake, and to be honest, it feels much warmer like that, so I decided to go with it. So to continue and with this painting and not to make things too complicated with the water, I decided to go in with the painting of the front part and essentially picking a darker green color, which I orientated myself from the painting, but then I chose an even darker color because I knew it wouldn't look, it would fade in with the lake essentially with that green. So I start by creating a bit of a bank of next to the river or in front of it with that green color, and then choosing a bit more of a textured brush, which in this case will again be turpentine. I go in with some lighter and some darker colors and essentially start to put down the shadow and the light for the grass that I'm going to be painting in. It's going to be very rough in the beginning to get all the colors in there, and then I'm going to go in with a finer pencil or brush and I'll start putting in the individual grasses and also the flowers. So generally speaking, I would be using the old brush which I have modified for my own personal use, which works the best for grass, to be honest. And I started out trying to do that with this dry brush, but to be honest, I ended up finding it looked like flowers, so I just started dotting it everywhere. I'm using a light green color in mint, so it's not white and doesn't stick out unnaturally, but I will be adding some white later onto it with the studio pen. But the dry brush seems to be working great for these flower thingies, and I ended up also using them on the trees in the background and for a bit more softer texture in the mix as well. Okay, so next I'm going to be going with the 6B pencil, and I'm going to start adding grass, individual grass elements. So I just kind of orientate myself at the colors I already have blotted in, starting with the mid-tone that I can see there, and then essentially just brushing them in like that, layer over layer, adding mid-tones and then going over the mid-tones with darker colors to make sure that there's like this kind of effect where you can see darker shadows of the grass that is closer, and that kind of also hides the bottom bits of the lighter grasses that kind of stick out, so it just kind of looks a bit more natural that way. So I'm working from light to dark, and then later on I'll add light on top, but not in long strokes but in short ones. You'll see hopefully what I mean by this. Okay, so it's time to merge and clean up my layers again before I move on to adding some more highlights and then working on the lake bit. As I explained earlier, to do the lake in a mirrored way, I wanted to make sure that I put down the colors that I want to add into the lake first, and then using that smudging method with a brush, I kind of smudge it in horizontal lines and then in vertical lines or the other way around, and that kind of creates that mirrored effect. I go on to doing some tree stuff. Essentially, I want to add some more colors into the tree trunks, and I chose this brown color, but I want to see if it matches with the other colors, so I kind of scribbled it across to see. I felt like it worked quite well because it gave a bit of a contrast to the greens around. So with a studio pen I started putting in lines of that color on the edges of the wood or the tree trunks, and then later on I will be smudging it out with a stucco pen or a brush, but I'm adding some other colors first. This is all done on a clipping layer, that is why I'm not painting over the lines themselves from the tree trunks. If you go back a little bit in the video, you'll see what I mean. But I'm also happy to make another video on it if you feel like you'd like a better explanation on it. Here you can see the clipping mask, and I'm going to use that stucco brush from the Procreate original brushes, and I'm going to start smudging out the lines that I created to give it a bit more of a blended effect. Those need not to be too clearly, but you can add some more on top. As you can see from a bit of a distance though, it already gives it a little bit more shape. Using the stucco brush, I'm adding some more patterns to the tree bark now with some lighter colors and some darker colors to enhance the shadow and the light. Okay, now I finally move on to the clouds. I feel like I've already announced that earlier and I didn't actually ever get to it until now. So I am going to be choosing a white and I will be trying out several different brushes because I never felt like it did me too well with the ones I chose. So I think this is the turpentine brush. I know I chose the stucco brush as well, and I also tried it out with the round brush. So, you know, anyhow it works for you, but essentially I tried to just gently blend in some clouds. That was actually with the dry brush just now the stucco brush, and then just seeing how it naturally evolves by smudging it and by erasing parts and blending parts. So it is kind of a trial and error, and I hope that what I'm doing explains it better than what I am trying to say right now. Now to continue with the water, I'm choosing the turpentine brush and I'm adding a lighter color on the far side of the water to show that there's a lot of movement over there, and the mirror is kind of obscured by it, by the white waves movement and light coming in there. But you know, I think the whole water thing was also a bit of a process for me where I changed things several times that I did. So yeah, just trying them all out. But I know that adding some white lines to it at the very end usually does give it the effect of being very strong in motion, that everything is moving over there. If you want that, I ended up not going with it because I felt like it also just kind of took out the warmth from the water for me, that light blue color. So I will be changing that in a minute. I had created a lot of layers at this point, and obviously there was light and dark and all different kind of layers. I definitely lost a little bit of the plot with it when it came to it, so I tried to organize it in the next few clips. But also I just tried to see where the shadow would look best on what layer, and if it would be better to put the shadow over the light or have the light be beneath it, and then also trying to find out where I had that white strip, which layer that was, because I really didn't like that. It felt uneven even though I tried to use the grid. So I believe while sorting out my layers and stuff, I eventually got rid of it. I took away with the eraser a lot of the white stuff, and then I added a bit more green highlight and also just like spotted highlight. At this point I definitely felt like it was much better than before. The white wasn't that glaring anymore and it felt a bit more natural, but also by adding some more shadow, it definitely helped to kind of increase the contrast with the light and make it a bit more, bring it more to life. Now and again I do try and go through the different blending layers as I just did, and to see what kind of difference it would make to have it on various intensities, but I left it at normal and I decided to erase parts of it to let more of the shadow through. And then using the eraser I also started streaking it down through the vertical line to also give it that mirror effect again. Now I'm trying to add a little bit more between the two parts of the picture, between the lake and the grass, to make sure that it is kind of easier and flow together and there isn't a weird kind of part that sticks out where nothing is bound together. Using the Procreate Studio pen, I go in with a green, really intense light color, and I go and try and put in my highlights. I will be smudging those out quite a bit so it doesn't look so, well, you know what I mean. Maybe out of place is a good word to describe it, how it was before. And when you smudge it, and then I try and add like little highlights to where the waves would come up a little bit, or where there would be more light gathering than not. Once again struggling with the persevering, so I went in ahead and added some little birds because the details that you put in and the small stuff does really make it come to life, in my opinion. So yeah, also I did appreciate the texture in the background now with the clouds. I was quite happy with that. They didn't need to look natural for me. They were just kind of a bit of like a shadow of a cloud, really. As you've seen, I was trying to sort out my layer mess, and by experimentation looking through the various layers if they could be of any use at all. But even with this one now, the second 17, the one below, I'm just going to get rid of that because there's no need for it, to be honest. It's nice when there's like a bit of an overview over the different layers and there's not like 10 layers with the same grass details, but you know, kind of just keeping on top of it I found to be the easiest way to organize them, because I do just add layers on top of each other. Okay, so using the technical pen, which is essentially a bit finer than the studio pen, I'm going in and trying to add some more details to the water body here and cleaning up what I feel like is still a little bit of a mess with the light on the water. The connection between water and land makes or breaks the whole thing for me, really, and I can always say just adding plants on the side that grow over and that dip into the water usually help the most for me to be able to get a bit of a transition going there. Fog hanging over water is also something that adds a bit of mystery to the whole thing, and I did try out a few things, but to be honest it didn't look very nice. Once again I used Gaussian blur for the whole thing, and just a random marker, I believe, as brush. I discarded the idea for now and went in and added some more dark where the branches came out and were kind of covered by leaves, because that does add to the effect where there's a bit more darker shadow. It kind of sticks out a little bit more. For this I used the dry brush because it did add a nice soft kind of blurred texture to it. Similarly, I started blending the top a little bit more as well, just adding some more dots with a studio pen and making sure that there was a transition between the light and the dark colors up there. The last remaining time now is literally dedicated to just finalizing the details, adding them where necessary, where it was kind of obvious, adding some more light to the water and coming through the leaves kind of. But that is pretty much it, so I won't be saying much now as my voice is also starting to fade because I've had a bit of a cold, and I'll just explain the light, how I do that in a minute with the blending. So yeah, I hope so far this has been pretty clear and understandable in what I've said, and yeah, any questions always welcome, please, down in the comments. Okay, so now I'm going to start adding some light to the water that is coming through the leaves. I'm going to set the layer to the blending mode Add, which intensifies and illuminates everything really intensely, and I'm going to start softly brushing in the color that I've chosen here, which is a green, a very strong green turquoise kind of color. And I'd like to have it kind of dapple on the water itself to come in through in rays, so I don't want to make everything bright necessarily, just a few things. And then I'm going to add some vertical slash like diagonal lines that come in very softly, very gently, and just kind of making sure that those aren't harsh lines by erasing parts of them and by smudging out parts of them. I'm really happy with how this is looking right now, and I decided, of course, in a minute I'm going to add the signature of most of my paintings, which is fireflies / fairy lights, and I'm using the light pen for that, which has always been the original Procreate pen, I believe, that I've been using. So nothing new here. I'm just going to go through the various colors to see which one would fit this painting the most. It could be, you know, any one of them really, but I decided to settle for like a green light one that would fit with the colors I've chosen in this, especially for the light. And yeah, I'm just going to start dabbling them around the light source, and they're kind of dancing on those light sun rays and whatnot, so they're gonna go everywhere in this painting. And I'm also going to choose some of a more yellowish color, and I'm going to add them at the top of the trees. Okay, so we are nearly at the end now. We're just a minute or so away, and I will just add a little clip of the details and the close-ups of this painting at the end. And do feel free once again to send me yours on Instagram or to tag me on Instagram so I can share them online. But yeah, I hope you've had fun with this, and I do wonder if anybody did actually watch it through to the end. You're welcome to comment and let me know if you did. I am really grateful for all your support, and watch time obviously is one of them. But my main aim is to give you something that you can enjoy, that you can create to, that inspires you and fuels your creativity hopefully, while also explaining how I go about the things I do. So I hope this was understandable and you had fun. And here are the close-ups now.